My name is Melissa Walker. I have 3 children of my own. My baby is now a junior in high school in a western rural community, and I've got 2 that are out of school, but 2 that are still living at home. So, you know, hey. I've been a school nurse, like she said, for, well, 8 years, and then I came to the Department of Education to oversee school nurses and provide resources and guidance to them. And there's about 920 school nurses in the state of Iowa for about 500,000 children total. So I'm going to talk a little bit about health services at school to kind of give you an idea of what health services are provided, and then I'll roll into a little bit about delegation and how that works, and then more into Section 504. And at the end, and throughout this whole presentation, if you have any questions or you want to bring up something that maybe you've experienced or have had issues with in schools, then please feel free to share and we can walk through that, or any kind of questions that you have, because I'm pretty open to that open discussion. I like to be transparent. If there's anything that you want to know, please just let me know. So let's first define out what school health services and school nursing services are. School health services are provided by either the school nurse or a qualified school personnel, and school nursing services are provided by a school nurse. This is in federal regulation, and a lot of people get those 2 mixed up. Sometimes they cookie cutter health services into, like, well, the school nurse, all she does is Band-Aids and ice packs. And that's not all that the school nurse does. The school nurse does a little bit more. Or they might put somebody in a school building that isn't a school nurse and plug them in the health service. So I always throw up my "Where's Waldo?" How many of you have children in school right now? So we've got a couple. Who provides health services and school services or nursing services in your school? Just because there's a person sitting in the nurse's office doesn't necessarily mean that person is the school nurse. It may be a health associate. It may be a para. It's always good to know. I ask parents that all the time when I present, do you know your school nurse? Or do you know who provides health services? And are they a registered nurse? It's an important question to ask. When we go to the doctor's office, we expect that the person that we see wearing the white coat is the doctor. And you would want to know, if you're bringing your child into a school building, that the person that's sitting in that office is actually a nurse. So I always remind parents to check. And I won't kill you and read by the PowerPoint, but what are the duties of the school nurse? This is in Iowa Code and Special Education. School nurses have to provide health assessment. They're part of the education team in your school building, just as your teacher, your janitor, your food service director, your principal, the para. Everybody's a team to try to promote the academic success and learning of your student. And they also serve as a liaison to participate and encourage communication with the healthcare provider, instruction to eligible individuals or the staff in collaboration with the prescriber. So basically, the school nurse will have a child come in who has health services. Say the child has type 1 diabetes, or the child has a seizure disorder, or the child has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and this child's going to require some health services in the school, whether it be administration of a medication, an injection, maybe it's straight catheterization, maybe it's suctioning a trach, or maybe it's providing an IV antibiotic at noon via a PICC line, depending on what's going on with that child. It could be a range of services. The school nurse then has to make a determination whether he or she can delegate those services, if it's appropriate to delegate those services to an unlicensed assistive personnel. We have laws that say that we can't delegate things that fall above the ascribed level of practice of an LPN. So doing an IV piggyback, no, we can't do that. Suctioning a trach, no, we couldn't delegate that. Maybe med administration, depending on the child and the complexity of care for that child. And I'll go into a little bit more about delegation as we get through. So we talked a little bit about school nurses who assign and delegate. They supervise also the special health services, the level of supervision, and the documentation. So we tell school nurses that, we do have the professional ability to delegate nursing services, but you can't just delegate and walk away. So if you're going to be employed at a school only 8 hours a month, it's really hard to delegate medication administration to 3 children with type 1 diabetes, G-tube feedings to 4 children, asthma care on 18 children, and then maybe you have 2 children that you have to feed at noon and monitor for choking, and you've delegated certain tasks, but you can't just delegate and check in like once a month. You need to be able to have that continual communication and frequency just in case something were to happen to that child. And also have that documentation that you're actually supervising and evaluating and monitoring the tasks that get delegated in school. So when I talk to schools, when I talk to parents, when I talk to educators, I always remind them to make sure that their nurse is a nurse, that things are documented, and also that the nurse is monitoring and evaluating. Yeah.
Can you say what the requirement is to have a nurse? Because they don't have to have a nurse, is that right? Or
school districts have to have a nurse by law. That's in 281. Access. They can share, they can contract, they can hire a nurse for 5 minutes a year and meet that requirement. The law is every school district shall have a school nurse, semicolon. It is recommended that they have 1 nurse to 750 students. Recommended does not mean required, and shall does not mean full-time. Shall means they should. Now, with that being said, if we go back to federal regulations, school districts are required to provide health services under the Individual Disability Education Act. So there's a balance there. And most schools do have a school nurse, whether she be part-time or they share a contract. Sometimes I see that smaller school districts with populations of students like 60 kids for their entire district, or maybe 150 to 200 children for the entire district, may contract with a public health agency, or they may share a nurse, and that school nurse might be going in between 4 or 5 districts. There are some school districts that want 1 nurse every day, all day. Their parents have advocated with their school board that we want a nurse every day, all day in every single school building. And that's the way that their district goes. So it varies across the state.
Yeah, some school districts where we see some challenges is they just contract with that clinic nurse once a month to do paperwork. And that's
right
where it's really challenging.
Right, and when I talk to public health nurses that do contract in public health agencies, some of the contracts are, we'll call you if we need you, and I always tell the public health agency, you're not 911. You don't contract when you're needed, because if you're only being called when you're needed, then you're not addressing the preventative piece, which is actually the school health services. You want to keep that child safe and provide those health services. Then if the child needs additional services, then 911, but we don't contract as needed. Because why would you? If a child falls on the playground and they break their arm and then, let me call the public health agency nurse and see if she can swing by, more than likely that would have been a call to 911. And public health agencies are starting to realize that, this isn't probably the best thing. We need to have more consistent hours. We need to be looking at what services we're providing and the complexity of care for the children.
So there really isn't any requirement that somebody be in charge of medical issues throughout the day kind of thing?
No, not yet. So when I start going into health services, and I've presented to parents at camps, and I've presented to principals, and of course school nurses. And the one thing that I always try to say is when I'm here at the DE is I'm here to advocate for parents and to advocate for children and to advocate for schools and school nurses. So I always start with the trust. We have to have trust between the healthcare provider, the educator, the school nurse, and the parent and the student. And sometimes that's not as easy as it seems. Sometimes it's a smooth transition, and sometimes it may take 2 or 3 years. You know, and what I tell nurses and what I've told parents is never quit, because the person at the end of the line is always the child. Always. So we have to work together, and we have to figure out a way that it works. So I'll go into a little bit, and this comes with delegation. So we have med administration, and med administration means that unlicensed assistive personnel in the school, which means a principal, educator, a para, has taken a course provided by the Department of Education. It's 17 modules. They go through this course, they take a quiz after each module, and then they do a hands-on demonstration for the school nurse that they can provide pills, eye drops, ear drops, liquids, that kind of medication, prescription or over-the-counter. Injections, G-tube feedings, catheterizations, all of those things are a little bit different because they're a little bit more invasive and a little bit more complex depending on the student. So every act of delegation is student-specific, situation-specific, and not task-specific. So I tell parents, you know, I've gotten calls from moms and dads who said, well, they can administer meds, so they can do everything. Well, no, they really can't. Or administrators who have called me and said, well, Sally's a para, example that Sally's a para, so I'm going to have her do everything. No, Sally doesn't have to do everything. She can say that she doesn't feel comfortable with doing that, and she can refuse to sign consent to do so. So delegation is kind of tricky. And it's also, and this is where administrators get in trouble, because it's used in all professions across the nation. Principals delegate who's going to do recess duty. They delegate assignments to teachers. They hire teachers. In businesses and insurance companies, we delegate work. You know, everybody's got delegation. But when it comes to nursing practice, the only person that delegates that practice is the nurse. And when a principal starts delegating nursing practice, then the principal is now practicing nursing, and they're violating their ethics. And that's a licensure violation, just like if a nurse were to go and pretend to be a physician and start practicing medicine. So sometimes administrators get kind of jammed up there, and we have to do a little bit of clarification on who delegates what to protect the educator, to protect the nurse, and most importantly, to protect the student, because we want that student safe. School nurses also understand that families may not be aware that the nursing task takes on a more complex role when it's in the school setting. Had a child that had a PICC line. This is an example that we use that had a PICC line and needed an IV antibiotic. Mom and dad wanted to go to the grocery store. So they had their neighbor come over. They showed their neighbor how to do that PICC line, how to hook up that IV antibiotic, and they delegated to the neighbor. The neighbor also works as a para in a school building. So the parents bagged up all the child's belongings, all the supplies for the PICC line, and sent it to school for the para to do in the school setting. And the nurse was like, no, we can't do that, because we also have all these laws that we have to follow. And although what's okay at home might not necessarily be okay at school, we have to ensure that it's safe. We also, as a nurse, can't delegate that. It's against her license. So they had to end up working with the parents, and they got the nurse just was able to delegate what she was doing during that time to come over and do the IV antibiotic. So that way the student was safe, everything was fine. And if the parents chose to have the neighbor do the PICC line at home, then that's fine. It just couldn't work that way at school. And I think the parent got that understanding too, so it was helpful. School nurses are held to higher regulatory standards when providing that care to the student or school than a parent delivering the same care at home. If something happens to a child at home, fine. If a nurse does something to a child at school, it's a little bit different. So what's an IHP? An individual health plan. I get this question a lot. What is an IHP? Why does my child have one? Can I write my own child's IHP? Can I just, what is that? What is that document? An IHP is what defines the level of nursing practice that nurse is doing, or the health services that are being provided in the school. It's what the nurse is going to be held accountable to if anything were to happen to that child as well. So an IHP is a working document. It demonstrates what that nurse is doing for health services to meet the child's needs. We hear emergency action plans. I've heard medication care plans. I've heard emergency evacuation plans. There's all these different acronyms for plans that can all be developed within the IHP. An emergency action plan would be, one example is a student has anaphylaxis and they have an allergy to peanuts. If they were to ingest peanut or be around a peanut, they would require, if they had symptom A, B, or C, if you see this, do that. You would administer epinephrine. That would be an emergency action plan, but that also is a nursing service, so it would be developed under the IHP. Emergency evacuation plan is, say you have a 14-year-old student with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy who uses a wheelchair to access classrooms and move throughout the school building. Emergency action or emergency evacuation plan would be what happens if there's a fire drill. How would that child be able to safely get out of the school building? Do we offer that child, does that child get to take an alternative route? And those are plans that should be practiced. They shouldn't just be written and left alone. Those should be practiced and documented on a consistent basis. So what are the components of an IHP? A lot of people are like, what's in an IHP? We have an acronym. It's called ADOPI, and nurses use that. It's assessment, nursing diagnosis, outcomes, planning, intervention, and evaluation. Where does that come from? It comes from the Nurse Practice Act. It's in 655, chapter 6, 6.2. Nurses shall utilize the nursing process in the practice of nursing, nursing assessment, formulating the nursing diagnosis, planning, goals and priorities, that's outcomes and interventions and evaluation. And a nursing diagnosis isn't actually like a medical diagnosis, and people might get jammed up there and think that it is. A nursing diagnosis might be impaired nutrition related to a metabolic disorder. If the child had gastric esophageal reflux disease, it's just saying that the child's got an impaired nutrition related to a metabolic disorder. So those are the components of an IHP. And what is an IHP? It's just a plan that defines the nursing services and health services for a student during the school day. It's how those health services are going to be provided. It's part of the educational program for that child. It equals the playing field for that child, so that child's safe during the school in a least restrictive environment. Licensed health personnel developed a written plan with the education team, and that's in Chapter 41 of Special Education Law. So how many of you know about Section 504? 2, 3, 4? That's great. First group of parents that I ever presented to, I had maybe 5. The third year, over 3/4 of the room raised their hand, so I think we're making progress on Section 504. So it's a Civil Rights Act that was developed in 1973, the year that I was born. So it covers the rights of all individuals with disability and not just school-age children, which I don't think a lot of people understand. Adults can have a 504 plan, and it prohibits disability discrimination for any program or activity that receives federal funds. And guess what schools receive? Federal funds. And this is the criteria: a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits the individual in one or major life activity. So with that being said, I get a lot of calls from school nurses across the state of Iowa saying, can I write a 504 because I don't have a diagnosis on this child? You don't need a diagnosis. to have the child evaluated for a Section 504. It's a potential or actual suspected disability. There's no need for them to provide you any kind of medical records that states that a child that has a diagnosis to have a 504 plan. Parents, they'll ask me about Section 504. Well, we haven't had them diagnosed. I don't even know if my son or daughter will be eligible. You don't need to have your son or daughter diagnosed to be eligible. You ask for an evaluation in writing to your school district, and the team gets together. So what does it do? It protects against discrimination, and that's very important. Qualified individuals with a disability shall solely by reason of his or her handicap not be excluded from the participation or be denied the benefits of the program. So that's kind of an important, I love Section 504. I would love to see all health plans eventually written under Section 504.
And so how would you get a health plan as opposed to a 504 plan?
That will go, yeah, so how do you get the health plan versus a 504 plan? If you're providing any health services in the school and there's a school nurse, they should be developing an IHP. But they should also be notifying their Section 504 coordinator too as well to let them know. That would be best practice. A lot of students who have health plans that do not have a 504, I think it's because nobody's asked for an evaluation. And I think that comes with awareness and education for parents that Section 504 is there and how does that work. Which on the Department of Education website, Fred Kinney is the Section 504 consultant and the equity coordinator for the Department of Education. And him and I have done multiple trainings across the state on the intersection of Section 504 and IHPs. And then Fred Kinney has also done just Section 504 trainings as well with parents and educators trying to get the word out there. I think if they have an IHP and they don't have a Section 504, that probably it's because the parents don't understand that they can ask for an evaluation or nobody's really evaluated them.
And we do have a sample letter for requesting an evaluation for a 504 plan on the Ask website.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure is it worth asking for a health plan specifically separate from a 504 plan? But I suppose if you had the health plan,
then it can be rolled right into a 504 or be part of a 504 plan because the health plan really only defines the health services that are being provided, but a child may need other accommodations, educational accommodations, nutrition accommodations, other accommodations that would be more broadly defined in a 504 plan that can't be defined in the IHP. And also, when you have a 504 plan, you have a team, which includes an educator, which includes maybe the bus driver. You know, we're rural. We got kids that get on the bus first thing in the morning, and that's the first person that sees them at the beginning of the day and the last person that sees them, and one of the most important people that we tend to leave out of those meetings, especially if you're on a bus 2 hours a day. You know, everybody forgets about the bus driver. It's like, I mean, that's a critical piece of, did we evaluate? Does our bus driver know? You know, does the cafeteria staff know? Does the food service director know? There's a lot of things that we have to think about. Every child's an individual, so we have to look at that child and then look at who would impact that child in their educational setting, and the schools really need to focus in on that, those people being part of the team.
So for kids, say seizures, autism, all these different disabilities, not IEP eligible, is it best practice for 504 plan?
They should be evaluated for a 504.
You got field trips, you got singing, but they should be evaluated.
Somebody should recommend that they be evaluated or put it in writing so that they are at least evaluated. A team may get together and make a consensus and an agreement that child doesn't qualify for 504 and they've documented that reason. But if the child's never been evaluated for 504, then they may have qualified. What's
the evaluation consist of? Because you don't hear of schools doing evaluation. They either put them on or they choose not to.
I don't know if I've never heard of them not doing a 504.
You know, in IEP, they have the evaluation process, but I didn't realize there was a process.
There's a process with 504.
Each district has their own 504 policy
Yeah.
procedures.
So it's not standard by the state.
No.
Standardized process, and so each district will kind of have their own process for determining that eligibility. Some of them do like to see a diagnosis from a doctor as part of it, and then, so I see that a lot, some type of a diagnosis, and then oftentimes I'll also see, they wanna know if there's an impairment in the classroom of some kind, so they'll send something around to teachers asking, do you see any kind of impairment in the classroom? Where the student would need supports, and so that's usually what I see as
It
the
varies.
evaluation.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, if there was a standardized way.
Oh, we wish. We wish, but no, there's not. We did update the parent guide and the educator guide on 504 and placed it on the DE website to make it more user-friendly. We pared down like 100-page manual to like 6 pages or 8 pages for parents. And I think there's like 20-page for educators on the 504 process. And collecting that data is important. That's the piece of the evaluation.
I would say one of the things that I hear the most when I talk to a parent about a 504 plan is that I will often say there ought to be some kind of a guide or a manual or something that describes the process that the district uses to determine that eligibility. Most of them have never heard of it, seen it,
It's very informal.
and a lot of educators in that district don't know that there is one. So it's a hard to find document, but it ought to exist.
And some of our larger schools are creating manuals. Some of the schools have it at their sign-up day. It's important. We have students that have a lot of mental health issues where maybe their medications, they're going through a medication change, so the child might be extremely fatigued in the morning, where the child comes to school and needs to sleep a couple hours and wakes up at 10:30 and is ready to learn. But what happens is the child comes into school and all they want to do is sleep. Then they send the child home, and then the child's missed out on that 10 o'clock to 3:30 academic instruction, where if we would have had an accommodation to adjust for that medication period, then maybe that child wouldn't miss out on that academic instruction in just a couple hours. Child with diabetes, I always tell parents, I had a superintendent call me, and he said that he was really worried about this child's academic success and wanted this child to graduate, but she had to leave the classroom to have her blood sugar checked in the nurse's office because it was blood. And I was like, oh, please, it's a little drop. It's not even, a little drop. And I said, you're really concerned about the academic instruction of this child, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, how many minutes does it take that child to leave the classroom and go down to the nurse's office and check their blood sugar? 5 minutes. Okay, I want you to take 5 minutes times 180 days. We're just gonna go with 1 blood sugar check. And he said, okay, that's 900 minutes. I said, how many hours of academic instruction is that child missing because you're making them leave the classroom to go down to the school nurse to check their blood sugar? Can we not think outside the box? Can we not have that child check their blood sugar in the back of the classroom or at their desk? It doesn't matter. Wherever the child feels comfortable checking their blood sugar. Can we have a parameter? Can the teacher check in with the student? If it's too high or too low, then he or she can go down to the office with a buddy. But if they're okay, they're okay. And guess what? While that student was checking their blood sugar, their ears were still getting the academic instruction. It was less time. That's only 5 minutes. And I got to tell you, that would only be if the nurse's office was right next to a classroom. But when we're looking at academic success, if that's a real concern, then we need to think outside the box on what we do for accommodations. So if you have a child with mental health disorder, depending on how that's affecting her academic instruction, then the team's really got to get together and put their heads together on what's going to work for that child. And there's no cookie cutter recipe that's going to fit every single kid. And that's the message that I drive home to superintendents, administrators, and parents. And I think parents get that. And I don't think that parents understand that they have the power. They really do. Parents are very influential if you can get them there. If you can get them at the table, but they've got so much going on. They're so exhausted. my son has Tourette's, and I think he spent his whole second grade classroom outside of the classroom in the hallway, and I was looking at rights law, and I wasn't even working at the school that time. I was working at Child Serve with children with disabilities. That's how I ended up in the school, was because of my son. Because I figured if I was going to live there, they were going to pay me, so I became a para. I just quit nursing altogether. I quit practicing nursing and became a para. With a child with a mental health disorder, and boy, I thought the school was going to show me. You know, they sent me with the most difficult kid, and I absolutely loved that kid. It was the best experience I had, the most challenging and the best experience. I remember the boy was doing a timed math test, you know, those 1-minute time math tests, and then they got to move a clip up the alphabet. And you know, when all the class is sitting here at X, Y, and Z, and you got this one kid that's stuck on like D, and he can't get any farther because he can't write fast enough, and he gets frustrated, and he crunches up his paper and he throws it on the floor, and he throws the desk, and he leaves the school. And as a para, I'm following behind him, and finally it just like clicked on me, and I went to the teacher and I said, hey, listen, do you want to know how well he can write, or do you want to know if he knows the facts? What's more important? And she said, well, I don't care how well he writes. I want to know how well he can do the facts. I said, fantastic. Can he just tell me instead of having to write it? She just looked at me. It was like, oh my gosh, what a great accommodation. Let's do this. And the kid went from D to like, he was like 3 letters behind his classmates. And, you know, was having difficulty reading. And I remember getting him to the point we'd go to special education room a couple times. And I said, hey, can we do something? Because he was having a hard time making friends. Can he read to the class right after recess? Can we just spend like 5 or 10 minutes? And can he read a book that he wants to read to the class? Can he pick a friend to help him, just to foster that, you know, the class was getting to do something special, and it was because of him. And he did. And I've never seen a kid, like, his chest went up, his shoulders went up, he was proud, and he was only this big, and now he's this big, and I see him every day almost, and he still remembers. And so just making those accommodations. And I remember being a parent and sitting in front of 8 people on the other side of the principal's desk. And I cried all the time, and I could never speak. And then I called a family education practitioner, or FEP, or an advocate. I called him a parent advocate. Was my lifeline, because that was my voice when I didn't have one. And we were exhausted. I know the school was having trouble with him. I was having trouble with him at home. But I'm also grieving over the fact that my child has something going on with him, and I didn't know what it was. This is true too, because we only have a couple per AEA, or sometimes a handful, and it's really hard. But we do have Ask Resources. They have advocates. You know, we do have other people that are willing to step up to the plate and help. But getting those resources out to parents has been my prime goal in making sure that children are advocated for. And now I'm at this Department of Ed, working as a school nurse consultant, and making sure that I can get as much information out there as I can and be transparent. If parents call me and they want to know questions, I'm on the dispute resolution cadre, so I take all the health complaints for the state.
So what if a parent and the nurse maybe don't see eye to eye?
Oh yeah.
Or have a different approach, you know, might have a different approach to something.
I'm not the friend of all the nurses. I have you know, when a parent and a nurse don't see eye to eye, and I usually have a parent call me, I give them the resources that they need. If the nurse isn't practicing safely, anybody has a right to file a complaint with the licensing board of the nurse. If a parent is concerned about the safety of their child, I refer them to the Iowa Board of Nursing if it has to do with the nurse's practice. I also refer them to their school administrator to have a meeting. And then from there, if they need to go higher, we go higher. But I make sure that we stay in contact, and I always tell the parent to give me a call. I try to give the parents the tools to advocate for themselves. I think parents have a lot of power when it comes to their child's well-being, and they know their child better than anybody else. And that child is in school for 35 hours a week, and a parent needs to know that their child's safe. So if it's a miscommunication, I try to build that bridge, which I'll go into a little bit. But nurses get panicky when a parent won't sign an authorization for exchange of information with a doctor. I tell a nurse they don't have to. They don't have to. Absolutely not. Do not have to. Well, how do I write a health plan? Well, you write a health plan for the health services that you provide in the school. You don't need a diagnosis to write a health plan. Right. And you know what? You communicate with that parent, and you keep communicating with that parent, and you keep working with that parent, and maybe 2 years down the road, and sometimes it takes 2, sometimes it takes 5. You fix that trust, and you build the bridge, and then maybe if they feel comfortable with you communicating with the doctor, they'll let you, and they may never, and that's completely okay. That's why we document. So that's... I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but that's what we do. So a little bit more, I won't read this. This is just discrimination on Section 504. This is the Title 34, the Code of Federal Regulation. Students may not be denied to participate in or denied benefit from services that are afforded to non-disabled peers, and that includes those extracurricular activities and school-sanctioned activities. So it's not just school day. Equal opportunity, FAPE, we use that word a lot, and I'm sure you probably know that, free appropriate public education. And that's also in 34. And individuals with IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act, for special education and related services. And I have a handout which I'm going to give you. Thomas Mays, okay. Our special education attorney wrote a letter, a memorandum, and handed it out to all. We sent it out to everybody. School administrators, AEA directors, school nurse consultants, everybody on what is a 504 and IHP. Here's the summary of the letter. What does it mean? Do we do IHPs instead of 504s? Oh, they have a diagnosis. I'll have one person write that 504. We don't do 504s in this district. The response is no. That is not the correct answer. And so this letter went out to try to drive home the message and give multiple examples of why we do Section 504. And we follow. Schools need to follow the process. Whatever their process is, they need to follow it. One person cannot write an IHP. Before I go into the differences, which I'll let you look at, I went to the Tri-State Legal Conference a couple years ago, and they had they were talking about 504 presentation, and they had a school district, and I want to say maybe in Texas. I thought it was in the Southern Circuit, but I'm not sure. They had a child with type 1 diabetes who had a great health plan, fantastic school nurse. The school nurse did everything. She trained the bus drivers. She trained everybody. But something had happened to the child, and the family had went back onto the school, and they had filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, and they had come in and they had said, what did the school do to meet the health needs of the student? And the school administrator said, well, we had a fantastic nurse. She wrote a health plan. She trained the bus drivers. She did this, she did that, she did everything. And the investigator for the Office of Civil Rights or whoever had come in said, that's fine that your nurse did what she needed to do to meet the health needs of the student, but what did you do as a school? Did you ever evaluate for a 504? No? Okay, well then fine. I want to see all of your health plans. So that's how it goes for schools. And so when we push the message out, have you evaluated the child for a 504? Do you have a process? What is that process? Is it available? Let's not be afraid of Section 504.
And with that said, there also isn't anybody who is checking at the Iowa Department of Education to make sure that that happens, though.
No, there's an equity coordinator and there's a 504 consultant. And I don't believe it's on the school improvement checklist.
So it's not something that most schools have a regular process of accountability for.
Yes, we're doing as much education as we can as possible to get schools on board because it's a local process. Right. Yeah. So differences, all children eligible for IDEA may be covered under Section 504. Not a lot of people understand that. Not all children eligible for Section 504 are covered under IDEA. So say you have a child with a learning disability, and that child has an IEP for that learning disability, and then that child gets diagnosed with leukemia, and that child's in chemo, and they're going to be missing some school. The school may decide to do a 504 plan for a temporary period and keep the IEP. Then say that child goes into remission, and the team meets and they don't need that 504 plan, they can turn it off. You don't get rid of it. You put it in the child's file. They still have their IEP for their learning disability, but they can have both. And we have seen that a couple times in the state where they have had both, an IEP and a 504. That IHP was put in the 504. Yes, it wasn't a standalone because that's what they had, was a standalone, but they didn't have a 504. Section 504 is non-funded. IDEA is funded. Both of them have due process. Both of them require consent for evaluation. There's consent for placement under IDEA. That's the differences. And then these are the similarities. There's both a child find process. I mean, Section 504, a lot of times we have teachers who make the recommendation for evaluation. It may be the school nurse. I've been pushing that message out to school nurses now for the last 2 years. That it's okay if you think that the child needs to be evaluated, the child needs to be evaluated. I've also encouraged school nurses that anytime that they write a health plan, they need to notify their Section 504 consultant annually thereafter and whenever there's a substantial change. You may have a student who has a diagnosis of ADHD and takes Ritalin in the morning in high school their freshman year. And they're taking medication at school because they're not compliant at home with taking it, and the mom has requested the school to administer the medication, so the nurse creates a med management plan in an IHP. The child is a 13, 14-year-old female, and she's in basketball, and she's got her driver's permit, school permit, and she's driving to basketball practice one day, and she gets into a car accident and sustains a head injury. She's a 4.0 student, and she's on the swim team, the rec swim team. Let's say all of a sudden she's dropped out of the rec swim team. Her grade point average has dropped from a 4 to a 2.3, and she quit the basketball team. And she's in the nurse's office for frequent breaks because she's having difficulty concentrating and she can't focus. And this child's got this health plan. And maybe the nurse has tacked on everything. Really, at this point, this child probably needs to be evaluated for a 504, for accommodations, because things aren't being met. There's academic needs for this child. There's other things that this child needs. That's why I always recommend school nurses to notify their Section 504 coordinator whenever there is a health plan made, annually thereafter, or whenever there's a substantial change. In my building of 900 students, in my district of 900 students, I probably had a health plan book this thick in each building out of those 900 students. But I don't know necessarily if they were all evaluated for 504 or if anybody had even considered notifying the Section 504 consultant, and that was many years ago. But I'm trying to change that across the state when I'm talking to school nurses to educate them on Section 504, educate parents on Section 504, and letting them know that that's out there, because I don't know necessarily if they know. So in a 504 plan, the beginning of a 504 plan is a nature of concern. And so in an IHP, on that assessment piece, that's where it would go in the nature of concern. So if you were going to take an IHP and move it into a 504 plan, that's how that would look. So a 10-year-old diagnosed 2 months ago with IBS, she has had a 10-pound weight loss over 8 weeks. And then describe the basis for the determination of handicap. That's also part of the 504. The IHP offers data. It's like a piece of data for the 504 plan to compare to the expanded list of major life activities in ADAA, the 2008 revision, which is any disability that impacts sleeping, walking, talking, breathing, eating, bending, lifting. I think it's autoimmune. There's some other, I think there's 15 total categories or more. So a student's missed 8 days of school in 2 months. She's dropped the local swim team. She requires specialized nutritional needs 8 times a day. Her grade levels have declined from A's to C's. Well, that's some pretty significant pieces of data, the basis for the determination. And then describe how the handicap affects a major life function. So if it's affecting her ability to concentrate, if it's affecting her nutrition and digestive system, it's affecting walking and her ability to focus, that's where those two would mix. So you could look at the ADA-AA list and go down and say, how is this impacting her life? And then the evaluation piece. So on an IHP, the nurse evaluates what intervention she does. So if I'm going to weigh a child once a month and I want to see that child gain 2 pounds a month because they're losing weight based off of medication, I would monitor that and evaluate those outcomes once a month and document them. It's no different on a 504 plan. Best practice would be review the 504 plan at least annually, but monitor those interventions that are being provided in the school. So when you're looking at a 504 plan, make sure that they're doing some kind of evaluation. Worst case is that they write a 504 plan and it goes in a folder and nobody looks at it. That's doing the child no good. That needs to be shared. Just like an IHP needs to be shared with the teachers and the bus drivers, and everybody needs to know. We need to be transparent. Like I said, those bus drivers, those kids are on the bus for 2 hours a day. If that child has a seizure disorder or that child has diabetes or anything, anaphylaxis, the bus driver needs to know what to do and how to look for it and just have some kind of general knowledge. Best practice is, it's all up to the school on their process. But that doesn't always happen. We are pushing and pushing and pushing this education out. It's state change never occurs easily. It's not, it takes sometimes a lot of advocacy and a lot of pushing to get it to go through. And you'll always have some that won't comply. And we hope that they don't flavor the pot for the many that do. So, sorry. So can an IHP developed by the school nurse meet the district requirement for Section 504? Absolutely not. Although the nurse is meeting the health needs for the student in the school maintains the responsibility to comply with and protect the equal opportunity rights for all students with disabilities to access and participate in education and activities. We drive that message home when we meet with AEAs and school 504 coordinators and school nurses. It's great that the school nurse is doing what the school nurse needs to do, but what is the school doing to meet the child's needs? Eligibility, we talked about it. It's a local level decision. It's a team decision. It has to have a mental or physical impairment substantially limiting the individual activity with a major life activity. The school determines the accommodation the school team does. Students may not be denied to participate. And we have to look that it's an appropriate education. And what are appropriate accommodations? That is tricky because it's based on the evaluation from the team and to what extent is the student limited in comparison to his or her non-disabled peers, and what is the team's justification. So if they can justify it and they can look at how that's impacting that one child, and based on the evaluation, that's how they determine the accommodations. But there's not going to be a cookie cutter mold for, oh, this child's got type 1 diabetes, so we're going to give you this list of accommodations. It doesn't fit. Every child's different. So let's talk a little bit about healthcare providers writing prescriptions for educational services. Data is important. I love data. I tell endocrinologists and nurse practitioners and everybody who writes a note that you shall do this. You shall have your child have a 504 plan. Your child, or this child shall have an IEP. That they're really just taking that trusting relationship and eroding it with the parent and the school. Because the parent really trusts that healthcare provider, and they're saying, well, I want a 504, so I'm going to get a note from the doctor that says this child shall have a 504. Write it. Well, a 504 has to be written, an evaluation request has to be written, and then they have to follow a process. So it can't just be wrote based off of one person telling them to do it. But it is an important and heavy piece of data. We want to pull the healthcare provider in, but we ask if they would just change their language to recommend versus shall. And that way we can work with the parent. A lot of times when I call healthcare providers, they said, well, the mom and dad were really angry, or the grandma was really angry, and I was just trying to make things smooth for them, make them happy. And I said, yeah, but in that 30 minutes, you eroded 13 years that this child's going to be in school. So can we just work together, because you're an important part of the team too? And a lot of times the healthcare provider is like, oh yeah, okay. So together we work for the trust and also for the child's academic success. I mean, it's about building bridges of communication. And my contact information is there. If you ever have any issues with your school nurse or your school or your parent and you want more resources, that's what I'm here for. And if I don't know the answer, I always forward on to whoever, whether it be Ask Resources, Disability Rights Iowa, AEA, legal. Yeah, if I can't answer it, I'm like, I don't know. I've had some of those. Roxanne. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.